What are the best and worst exercises for building grappling strength? In this video, I'm ranking 50 of the most popular jiu-jitsu strength exercises on a tier list from S for superior down to F for failure. The criteria for this list will be based on three things. Number one, force production, which refers to your ability to produce force as an expression of strength. Number two, progression. How well does this exercise allow for a simple progression that is specific to the goal of getting strong for grappling sports? And number three, overall feel and practicality. Does this exercise feel good, or at the very least, is pain-free? And is it fairly easy to set up? And if you don't know who I am, my name is Josh Selledge. I've spent over a decade training and coaching in the gym, as well as rolling hard on the mat. And I've spent the last many years studying and researching the best methods to help grappling athletes feel and perform their best in the gym and on the mat, so ultimately they can lift heavy and roll hard. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start with our first, one already fell out there. Our first exercise for the tier list, the trap bar deadlift. I'm a huge fan of the trap bar deadlift for a lot of reasons. When we look at our criteria, number one being force production, does the trap bar deadlift help increase your ability to produce force as an expression of strength? Absolutely. It's a great full body exercise, really emphasizes a lot of the lower body, but doing heavy trap bar deadlifts, you're going to increase in grip strength, increase in upper back stability and upper back isometric strength, as well as lower body strength. What is also great about the trap bar deadlift compared to some other forms of deadlifting is that because the handles are outside of your hips as opposed to right in front of your body with like a straight bar, you can put yourself in a little bit better of a position to take some of that load off your lower back, which if you're a grappling athlete, you really don't want to be putting a ton of extra stress on your lower back unnecessarily in the gym, because depending on what kind of grappler you are, you may be dealing with some lower back issues just from doing tons of grappling training. That's not to say that you should avoid lower back exercises, but if you're going to go heavy with a lower body movement, if you can avoid some of the direct strain on the lower back, that can sometimes be beneficial. So as far as force production goes for criteria number one, trap bar deadlift is going to be great. As far as progression, which is criteria number two, the trap bar deadlift is awesome. You can, very slowly add 5 pounds at a time, week after week, depending on how you're structuring your training program. The trap bar deadlift is pretty easy to learn. So a lot of times with certain exercises, certain exercises can rank really low on progression because technically they're really, really difficult. Trap bar deadlift is a very simple exercise. You could probably learn how to do a trap bar deadlift with proper form and technique within like a matter of a couple weeks. Now, as you continue to get stronger, you're going to continue to reinforce, proper form and technique. But it's a very simple exercise to do. You can produce a lot of force with it. So 2 out of the 3 criteria it freaking crushes on. Third criteria, feel and practicality. Trap bar deadlift, if you have access to one, super easy to set up. For a lot of people, trap bar deadlifts feel so much better than other forms of deadlifting like conventional deadlifts or even sumo deadlifts. So I'm going to say the trap bar deadlift ranks very high in all 3 criteria and is going to be S tier. Number 2, or the next one, hey, sumo deadlift. Okay, this is my personal favorite style of deadlift. I don't know if you guys can see, but the sumo deadlift. So the sumo deadlift is fantastic for grapplers. I didn't mention this on the trap bar deadlift, but one of the downsides of the trap bar deadlift is that your feet are close together and you're improving your ability to produce force when your feet are right next to each other, which that isn't necessarily bad, but there aren't very many positions on the mat where you're going to produce maximum levels of force with your feet right next to each other. Oftentimes, you're going to be in a staggered stance position or have your feet a little bit wider outside of your hips. So being able to build strength in the lower body and the posterior chain, which is your low back, your hips, your glutes, your hamstrings, all that stuff. Being able to produce force in that wide stance position is really important for wrestlers, really important for jiu-jitsu athletes. Now, a great way that we can load that and really improve and build our ability to produce force in some of those wide stance positions is with the sumo deadlift. Now, another great aspect of the sumo deadlift is that when it comes to progression, which is our second criteria, it's very similar to the trap bar deadlift that you can just keep adding a little bit of weight at a time to properly match, your own rate of progression and increasing in strength. Now, there is a little bit more of a technical difficulty with the sumo deadlift compared to the trap bar deadlift, but you know, once you do a few weeks or maybe even a month or two of practicing your sumo deadlift, you pretty much have it dialed in. Of course, there's always going to be things that you can dial in a little bit more to fine tune some of the details on how you pull slack out of the bar and things like that. But for most athletes, they're probably not going to be too concerned with that because they're not going to get to an elite powerlifting level where some of those really specific details on the sumo deadlift are going to matter all that much. So I'd say as far as progression goes, sumo deadlift crushes. Feel and practicality. Now, compared to the trap bar deadlift, sumo deadlift does lose some points here. Main reason being is because you have to, open up. I'm not going to say it on camera, but you do have to have a much wider stance than the trap bar deadlift. And for some people who have poor hip mobility or tight adductors and muscles on the insides of their legs, that can be really uncomfortable. Now, if it is uncomfortable to get into a sumo deadlift position, that's a sign that you need to work on your mobility and build strength in those wide stance positions. So even though the deadlift loses some points on overall feel and practicality, I still think it's a fantastic exercise. In my opinion, it's one of the greatest forms of deadlifting ever, and it's not cheating because there's no competitions that say you're not allowed to sumo deadlift. And if you do jiu-jitsu or wrestling, you're not competing in the deadlift anyway, so it doesn't even freaking matter. So sumo deadlift is going to go into S tier. 2 S tier exercises back to back. Now, let's see what the next one is. Let's see what we got here. Watch it be another deadlift. Okay, it's not a deadlift. It's another lower body exercise, the barbell hip thrust. Now, the barbell hip thrust is a very popular exercise because there's a lot of fitness chicks on Instagram that love this exercise because it's great for increasing the size and strength of your glutes. Now, posterior chain strength is very important for any grappling athlete. Your posterior chain includes your lower back, glutes, hamstrings, the muscles running along the backside of your body. Now, for pretty much almost every athletic movement that you do on the mat, whether you're passing someone's guard, taking someone down, doing some form of sweep, trying to scramble to a dominant position, so many of the athletic movements that you do on the mat engage a ton of the muscles of the posterior chain. So building up your posterior chain strength is going to be very beneficial as a grappling athlete. That being said, the barbell hip thrust is great for increasing the strength of your glutes, especially in hip extension or pushing your hips forward. However, in my personal opinion, I think you can get just as many benefits out of doing deadlifts, just as many benefits out of doing different types of posterior chain dominant squats. The biggest benefit from the barbell hip thrust is that when it comes to force production, specifically in the hip extension movement or specifically in being able to engage and squeeze your glutes, oftentimes you can load it up way more than other forms of deadlifting and other forms of squatting. So from a force production and a progression standpoint, it does kind of have a little bit more benefit. However, there are so many other additional benefits of doing deadlifts and squats that you don't always get with the barbell hip thrust. Now, in my opinion, where the barbell hip thrust really loses points is freaking feel and practicality. The barbell hip thrust doesn't feel good. If you're relatively lean, it freaking crushes your hip bones, which you could just, put like a sweatshirt or a hoodie on there to soften the blow a little bit. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But it is pretty hard to set up once you really start loading some weight. If you don't have a specific barbell hip thrust platform, it does get a little dicey trying to do it on just a regular bench that you move over to where the barbells are at and trying to do barbell hip thrust. So that being said, barbell hip thrust, great exercise, can definitely get really freaking strong in hip extension. However, I don't think it's S tier. I'm actually going to put it in B tier. Next exercise, 2 fell out. We'll go with this one. Dumbbell overhead press. This, I'm already thinking that this is going to be S tier. overhead pressing strength and just being able to be strong in that overhead position is so important for grappling athletes. You may have seen some videos I've made in the past on the best grappling exercises or grappling strength exercises. And in my opinion, when I look at the best exercises for grapplers, I just look at what are exercises that really strengthen the main movement patterns that we can do as athletes. So that's going to be pressing overhead, pulling down vertically, pressing horizontally, pulling horizontally. You got squat patterns, hip hinge patterns, lunging patterns, things like that. You can call them patterns or movements. I don't really think it makes that much of a difference. Anyway, the dumbbell overhead press is awesome for improving vertical pressing strength. Now, I think in this bowl, some of you submitted barbell overhead press, which the barbell overhead press does have some benefits to it as well. But what I really like about dumbbells that I don't like about barbells is that dumbbells, you can move the dumbbell position in any position that feels best for you. So when it comes to feel and practicality criteria, dumbbell overhead press ranks very, very high. Now, when it comes to force production, you can press dumbbells pretty hot, produce a lot of force doing the dumbbell overhead press. However, because you can move them in any position that feels best, they are a little bit more unstable. So anytime you start to remove some of the stability of an exercise, you start to limit how much force you can produce or how strong you can get in that exercise. When you look at people who have the dumbbell bench press world record, just compare that to the barbell bench press world record. It's like 500 pounds in difference, or maybe not 500 pounds in difference, like at least 300 pounds in difference. I think the world record on the current barbell bench press and powerlifting is like 770 or 780 pounds compared to the heaviest pair of successful dumbbell bench is like 200-pound dumbbells or 220-pound dumbbells. So you're looking in the 400s compared to the high 700s with more stability with a straight bar. All that being said, dumbbell overhead press is great. Is it going to be the ultimate form of force production in the overhead position? No. But one thing that I like to think about with stuff like this is grappling athletes oftentimes have really banged up shoulders, really banged up elbows. So sometimes sacrificing a little bit of overall force production just to be able to get into a more comfortable position, I think is going to be beneficial. So dumbbell overhead press, I think, is great. Meets the criteria for force production, meets the criteria for progression, because if you have a wide array of dumbbells, you can just move up 5 pounds at a time. If you're at a point where you can't move up in weight by 5 pounds, you can very easily just do more reps and it's not going to be that much of an issue. Is it easy to set up and does it feel good? For the most part, yeah. So all that being said, I'd say dumbbell overhead press is going to go in A tier. Next exercise, the hand gripper. Someone submitted the hand gripper. Okay, this is a very fun exercise because it's fun to hang with your boys and see who has the strongest grip. But honestly, when it comes to full body strength development, this exercise freaking blows. This exercise only strengthens the muscles of your hands, which hand strength and grip strength is so important for grappling athletes. But think about it this way. At least this is how I think about it. If you're doing a ton of grappling training and you're not using straps in the gym, everything you do is improving your grip strength. Every time you grab someone's wrist and they're trying to pull away and you're controlling their wrist to go for an arm drag, or if you train in the gi, every time you grab someone's collar and you start doing a collar drag, or maybe you do collar sleeve guard, every time you train, you're getting some exposure to working your grip in the context of grappling, whether that's wrestling, jiu-jitsu, whatever the case may be. And then if you don't use straps in the gym, every time you pick up heavy dumbbells to do heavy dumbbell rows, every time you do trap bar or sumo deadlifts, which is what we already talked about, and you don't use straps, you're also getting a ton of benefit in grip strength in that area as well. So if you're doing a ton of grappling training, do you need to use the hand gripper exercise? No, not really. In my opinion, you don't. I don't program for any of my athletes to do specific hand gripper work, only unless they're coming off of an injury, like a very specific wrist or a very specific elbow injury where their grip strength has decreased a ton. Outside of that, I don't even program this exercise for anybody, even though it is fun to do. So hand gripper is going to be our first F tier exercise. Bent over row. All right, so pulling strength is extremely important for grappling athletes. And there's a lot of different exercises that you could use to develop your pulling muscles. I talked about earlier that when I look at what are the best exercises for grappling athletes, I really look at, okay, what exercises are going to improve the main movement patterns or the main movements we do as athletes. One of those movements is going to be horizontal pulling motions, and the bent over row can be great. When it comes to force production, having a heavy barbell, doing heavy barbell bent over rows can be awesome. The problem with the barbell row isn't really in the exercise itself, it's really with how people do it. People have, most of the time on the internet, I see people doing absolutely atrocious barbell bent over rows, and they're not able to get as much benefit as they could out of the exercise just because their form and technique is abysmal. So if you're doing bent over rows properly, they can be great for building up the not just the size of your upper back and mid back, but also the strength of your upper and mid back. You can change and kind of tweak how you're doing the barbell bent over row to emphasize a couple different areas of what muscle groups you're working and how you're building strength with the barbell bent over row. The only downside to the bent over row, even though it's great for force production and progression, it crushes in because you can just keep adding a little bit of weight or adding reps to your sets as you progress in strength. The downside with the bent over row is that as you get stronger in the bent over row, if you're not also building up the strength of your lower back, you can put some of that additional load on your lower back. And thankfully, I haven't had a ton of lower back injuries, but when I have had lower back injuries in the past, it makes doing bent over barbell rows very, very tough. So then I just had to switch to a different exercise. It wasn't because there was anything wrong with the bent over row exercise. It's just that anytime you have a lower back injury or lower back issues, it makes doing that specific exercise, the barbell bent over row, really difficult. So it does, bent over rows crush in force production, crush in progression, but they do lose some points in overall feel and practicality. So bent over row, we're going to put that with the barbell hip thrust. We'll put that in B tier. Next exercise. Lost a lot here. Let's see what we got. Ooh, one of my all-time favorites, the Zercher Squat. Okay, so when I first put the poll out on Instagram and YouTube for you guys to send in what you thought were the best exercises for building grappling strength, I can tell you how many people sent in the Zercher Squat. Now, I've been doing Zercher Squats for years. Like, I first got turned on to the Zercher Squats by an OG grappling strength coach from way back in the day, Zach Evanesh. And Zach Evanesh's book, Underground Strength, I think it's called Underground Strength and Conditioning. That was one of the first training books I ever read. It's awesome. Whether you wrestle or do jiu-jitsu, it's a fantastic resource. Anyway, he talks about the Zercher Squat. Actually, I think the person who writes the chapter on the Zercher Squat is actually my good friend and mentor, Mark Bell. Anyway, the Zercher Squat is holding the barbell in the crooks of your elbows. There are so many benefits to the Zercher Squat. One of them being if you have shoulder or elbow issues where getting under a heavy barbell on your back is really uncomfortable, the Zercher Squat can be a great option for you. If you really struggle with some of the mobility requirements to do a back squat, a front squat, or movements that are very similar, by lowering where the weight is resting on your body and having it be in front of your body, you're able to change the leverages of where the weight is and your center of mass a little bit, which can make it a little bit easier for you to get into the bottom position of a squat without necessarily having to compromise anywhere in your lower back or your hips and things like that. That's not to say that the Zercher Squat will fix all of those mobility restrictions or all of those movement deficiencies that you have, but if you're an athlete that really struggles on something like a back squat or a front squat, the Zercher Squat may be a good option. Now, the Zercher Squat, even though I've talked about it for years, I've been doing it for years, and I think it's one of the greatest exercises ever, it does have some of its downsides, especially when it comes to force production. So when we look at our 3 criteria, the first one being force production, the force that you can produce on a Zercher Squat is limited by how much weight you can hold in the crook of your elbows. Now, for athletes who are doing the Zercher Squat for the very first time, sometimes that can be really uncomfortable holding it in the crook of their elbows. So they're not able to Zercher squat that much because the discomfort prevents them from being able to send it completely on the Zercher squat. Now, if you do the Zercher squat a lot and you kind of build up tolerance to hold a lot of weight in the crook of your elbows, that can be great because then your capacity to produce more force in that movement isn't as limited by the strength or the tolerance of your elbows. Now, the reason why I'm a big fan of the Zercher squat is because when it comes to doing barbell back squats or front squats and working mainly with grappling athletes over the last 7 years, their elbows and shoulders are an absolute mess. If you've been doing jujitsu for any period of time, if you've been doing wrestling for any period of time, you've probably banged up your elbows and shoulders at some point. And if you're dealing with some sort of elbow issue, you're dealing with some sort of shoulder issue, or just by the nature of being a grappler, a lot of grapplers have really poor shoulder and elbow mobility, and getting under a straight bar on their back is really, really difficult. So instead of trying to cram them under a straight bar, I often, when I'm coaching athletes, just have them do a Zercher squat. Now, for a lot of athletes that I first start working with, they're not super experienced in the gym. So it's not like they're coming from a powerlifting background where they squatted 600 so that their body has the capacity to squat 600. We'd have them do a Zercher squat and they can only squat 225. That's usually not the case. A lot of times these grapplers aren't that experienced in the gym, so they can kind of match whatever their back squat was. They oftentimes can just match that with the Zercher squat. Now, if they do start getting to a point where they're Zercher squatting, almost getting pretty close to 2 times their body weight, if they can't get under a straight bar just yet, I might have them do a different type of squat, which I think is in here, and I will save that squat for later because I don't want to spoil the surprise. But the Zercher squat is great for a lot of beginner and intermediate athletes in the gym. Once someone becomes more advanced, I phase out Zercher squats and end up putting in a different exercise. So Zercher squat does have a lot of pros and some cons when it comes to force production. When it comes to progression, Zercher squats, especially with the bar, is pretty easy. You can just add a little bit more weight, or you can just add another rep to your set. It does kind of have a cap though, because you are limited by the strength of your arms. And then feel and practicality, okay, it doesn't, the Zercher squat for the first time doing it doesn't feel great, but you can, wear elbow sleeves, or you can wrap the barbell in a towel or a hoodie. That's usually what I do. And so even though it's easy to set up, doesn't feel great. So the Zercher squat has quite a few pros and cons, but I'm a huge fan of it. So I'm going to put it in B tier. The face pull. I'm a huge fan of face pulls. Just off the top of my head, I don't think the face pull is a great exercise for maximum grappling strength, but I do think it's a great accessory exercise because the face pull, when you do the face pull correctly, you can build up a little bit of your traps in your upper back. You can definitely help strengthen your rear delts, which are very, very important for grapplers. A lot of times, because of just the grappling activities that we're doing, grapplers really start to get strong in this position here. They use a lot of their front delts. They use a lot of their biceps. They do use some of their upper back, but at least in my experience coaching grapplers over the last 7 years or so, their rear delts are really weak. And when your rear delts are weak, I've seen a really strong correlation with weak rear delts and increased shoulder pain and increased risk of shoulder injury. So that's not to say that doing face pulls is going to prevent injury, because there's nothing that prevents injury, but face pulls can be a great option to help kind of round out the durability and overall resiliency of your shoulder. And you also get to improve a little bit of upper back strength as well. Now, face pulls, when it comes to force production, it's really easy to start heaving weight and really start like jerking the cable or the band around. And that does kind of limit your overall force production, because even though you are moving the weight, that doesn't necessarily mean that the muscles that you're actively trying to strengthen are doing that much work. So you are kind of limited in that sense. When it comes to progression, it's pretty easy to progress, especially if you use a cable machine, because you just move the pin down in weight, or I guess increasing in weight, but down kind of the stack. And then you can always add reps if you want to, which is cool. And then when it comes to how does it feel and practicality, if you have access to a cable machine, it's awesome. It's super, super easy, especially if you have rope handles. If you don't have a cable machine, you can use a band, but you have to make sure you have the right band, because if you start using a band that's too heavy, you're really not able to emphasize the rear delts, because some of the bigger and stronger muscles start to take over a little bit. So the face pull is a great exercise. Is it great for building insane grappling strength? I don't think so. I think it's more appropriately used as an accessory exercise towards the end of your workout, or as a hypertrophy exercise to build up your upper back and rear delts. So when it comes to increasing grappling strength, I'm going to say the face pull is in C tier. Next exercise. What do we got? The front squat. Okay, front squats are great. We've talked about a few different squats already. The biggest issue I see with front squat, I'm going to kind of skip ahead because we're going to jump right into the third criteria, which is feel and overall practicality. For a lot of grappling athletes, the front squat feels awful, mainly because so many grapplers I've worked with have elbow injuries, wrist issues or wrist injuries, and very, very poor shoulder mobility. So picking an exercise that kind of attacks all of those things is going to make it really hard to produce a lot of force because of how uncomfortable it is, and it's going to be really hard to progress because of how uncomfortable it is. There are some things that you can do to work around this, like you can do like the crossed arms type of front squat, which, I'm not a huge fan of, but that's, totally fine. I personally don't like doing front squats that way, but some of the athletes I work with do it that way. Another thing with front squats is that because the weight is in front of your body, it really puts a lot of strain on your upper back, which is great for increasing postural strength. But you do need to have pretty good hip, knee, and ankle mobility to get all the way down into the bottom position. If you have poor hip, knee, and ankle mobility, that can be really tough. And one thing you can do for front squats is to elevate your heel a little bit to help you make it a little bit easier to get into that bottom position. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. However, I do think the front squat, at least in my mind, is a great mobility assessment. If an athlete really struggles in mobility in the front squat kind of highlights different areas that they may need to improve upon. So if they really struggle to get into the bottom position, hey, let's start improving your hip mobility. Let's start taking a look at your ankle mobility. If they really struggle to get into the front rack position, then I ask them some questions like, hey, what feels tight or what feels difficult to get into the front rack position? If they say, oh, my freaking elbows are destroyed, or my elbows are really hurting, or my elbows and wrists feel okay, but it's my shoulder that feels kind of problematic, then that's a good indicator that we should work on some of those things in some other training sessions. So front squat, force production, you can produce a ton of force in the front squat. You are limited by the front rack position, but for the most part, it's not that much of a limitation compared to something like the Zercher Squat. When it comes to progression, it's pretty easy to progress. You just add weight or add reps. It's not too complicated of a movement. It does take time to build the mobility to be able to do front squats really, really well. So that does take time. So I guess that takes away some points from progression. And then feel and practicality, it's pretty low on feel and practicality. But, you improve your mobility, you keep practicing it, you can make improvements in that area. So front squat, I'm going to put that in C tier. Next exercise, incline bicep curl. All right, so I'm going to sound a little bit like a hypocrite because I did put the face pull in C tier because it's so low on force production, but I think that the incline bicep curl has so many other benefits. Even though it's pretty low on overall force production, it actually ranks pretty high in how you're building specific strength in the bicep and the tissues surrounding the elbow and the shoulder. In jiu-jitsu, a lot of times when grapplers have elbow injuries, it's when their arms get extended, and a lot of times when they have shoulder injuries, it's when their shoulders get extended this way. And the incline bicep curl is a fantastic exercise to help you build strength in those fully lengthened and extended positions. So yeah, are you going to be able to incline bicep curl 100 pounds in each arm? Probably not. But the strength that you do build specifically in the tissues of the shoulder and where the top of the bicep and the bottom of the bicep and the tissues of the elbow, I do think that's very, very beneficial for grappling athletes. So force production loses some points, but when it comes to specific in those tissues and muscles, I think it actually ranks pretty high. When it comes to progression, you can progress the incline bicep curl in a couple different ways, which is really cool. If your biceps and shoulder and pec are crazy tight, you don't need to do a really, really low incline. You can start with a pretty high incline. And then each week, you can just use the same weight and drop the incline down a little bit more each week to further help improve the mobility of the pec, the shoulder, the bicep, and the elbow a little bit. You can also make progressions in this exercise by increasing the weight that you're using on the incline bicep curl, and you can always just add more reps to each set and go from there. So it does rank pretty high on progression. When it comes to overall feel and practicality, if you have a full rack of dumbbells and an incline bench, super easy to set up, super easy to do. When it comes to feel, I think this exercise feels great. You do want to be careful that you don't want to go too heavy on this exercise right away. Start slow, do plenty of warm-up sets, because if you jump into it right away, you may feel a pretty aggressive stretch on some aspects of the shoulder and the bicep and the elbow, and that doesn't always feel great. So all that being said, this might sound crazy. I'm actually going to put incline bicep curl in S tier because I'm such a huge fan and I think it has so many benefits for grappling athletes. Next question. The pull-up. This is already going in S tier. I think the pull-up is amazing. So when it comes to building body weight strength for grappling athletes, or your ability to control your own body weight, pull-up has got to be one of the best exercises out there. It's great for increasing vertical pulling strength. It's great for increasing grip strength, bicep strength, upper back strength, mid-back strength. Well, I guess it depends on how you're doing your pull-ups. Mainly it's upper back strength. Might get a little bit of mid-back in there. That being said, pull-up is fantastic. I think every grappling athlete, regardless of weight class, should be able to do 10 pull-ups. If you are a male grappling athlete and you cannot do 10 pull-ups, I don't care what weight class you're in, that's a freaking problem. You got to get your pull-up game up. So, fellas, get your pull-up game up to 10 strict bodyweight pull-ups if you haven't done so already. What's great about pull-ups is that when it comes to force production, you're improving your ability to produce force with your own body weight. So when we think about, grappling exchanges, whether it's in jiu-jitsu or whether it's in wrestling, there's definitely going to be movements and motions where you're pulling your opponent to you, but there's also movements and motions where you need to pull yourself to your opponent. And so it may not seem like there's that much of a difference there, but in a lot of ways, there are some differences just with doing a lat pull down where you're pulling away and you're kind of locked in and you're using that locked in position to pull something, an external load closer to your body versus not being locked into some form of lat pull down or something like that and pulling yourself to the top of the pull-up bar. So pull-ups are great. I think chin-ups are in here, so I'll talk about chin-ups separately. I view pull-ups as pronated grip or palms facing forward or neutral grip. If it's neutral to pronated, to me, that's a pull-up. Pull-ups going into S tier. Next exercise, the clean and jerk. Okay, when it comes to building strength for grappling athletes, I freaking hate the clean and jerk, and I think this already goes into F tier. Now, the clean and jerk is fantastic in force production because you're taking a weight or a barbell from the floor and putting it all the way overhead. The amount of force you have to generate to be able to do that, to get it up to your shoulders and then jerking it overhead is very, very, very high. So the clean and jerk does kind of crush it a lot in force production, but it loses, in my opinion, most of those points in progression. The clean and jerk is very hard to progress because it is such a technically difficult exercise. It's not impossible, but a lot of times progressions in the clean and jerk, especially for beginner and intermediate athletes, comes in the form of constantly improving their technique, not necessarily getting stronger. So when it comes to certain exercises, if a certain exercise has a very, very high learning curve, you may see progress in that exercise, which is great, but you're making progress in the technical side, which doesn't always have a transfer and carryover to you actually building strength that you can use on the mat. When it comes to feel and practicality, clean and jerk for a lot of grappling athletes feels awful because it puts a lot of strain on the wrist, a lot of strain on the elbow, and the overhead position can put a lot of strain on the shoulder. Not for all grappling athletes, but a lot of grappling athletes got elbow issues, shoulder issues, wrist issues. And then practicality. The clean and jerk I mean, it is fairly simple to do with a bar, but you have to make sure you have like a proper Olympic lifting bar, because trying to do clean and jerks with a non-Olympic bar or special Olympic weightlifting bar is kind of problematic. And then you also want to make sure you're doing it on a platform that can support Olympic lifting, like one of those wood platforms with the rubber on the sides. And then if you don't have bumper plates, it's probably not a big deal for you, but the gym owner is going to freaking hate your guts, because gym owners, when they see people dropping metal plates from overhead, uh, they freaking lose their mind. And I would too, because if I'm paying for all this nice flooring and someone keeps ruining it by dropping metal plates overhead, I'd be kind of heated too. So clean and jerk when it comes to overall strength, grappling strength. And is this the best exercise for developing grappling strength? I think absolutely not. I think clean and jerk goes into F tier. Next exercise, the floor press. This is another one of my all-time favorite exercises, so I'm going to try not to be biased. Main reason I'm such a fan of the floor press is because I'm way stronger in the floor press than my actual bench press, and that's because of a neck injury that I had several years ago, where it makes those deep pressing positions fairly difficult. But if I shorten the range of motion, I can lift a lot more weight. So, biasedly, I love the floor press, but from this point forward, I'm going to speak about it unbiasedly. So, what's great about the floor press is that it's kind of like a box squat for the upper body. And one of the main benefits of box squats is that when you are, actually, I'll just talk about the floor press, and then we'll talk about box squats whenever I pull box squat out of here. But for the floor press, you are using a shorter range of motion. So you're bringing the bar down and your elbows are going to hit the floor because you're laying on the floor. From that position, then you press up to lockout. Now, a lot of times when people are doing regular bench press, they use what's called the stretch reflex. So they bring the bar all the way down and they kind of hit that bounce a little bit at the bottom where the muscles stretch and they have a reflex to kind of slingshot back and contract really hard. Developing and improving your force production with the stretch reflex is not a bad thing. However, when it comes to grappling sports, there's a lot of movements that could be considered static overcome by dynamic. What all that basically means is that you're holding a certain position on the mat, and then you need to hurry and move and be able to be dynamic or go through some sort of dynamic movement. And so if all of your ability to produce force relies really heavily on the stretch reflex, again, not a bad thing, but you may be missing on some of those other strength qualities that are going to be important for grapplers. So that's why I'm a huge fan of things like box squats and floor press, because you separate the eccentric and concentric components of that movement and you take out a lot of the stretch reflex. Now, the other thing that I like about the floor press is that because you're laying flat on the floor, you also take out a lot of your leg drive. In jiu-jitsu, when it comes to producing force with our upper body, we're not going to be perfectly set up on a bench where we can screw our feet into the ground, pinch our upper back. You may see some powerlifters where they like grab the sides of the bench and create this crazy, crazy arch. We don't have the ability to do that in jiu-jitsu. I mean, I guess you could try. That would be very weird. But the floor press is a lot more similar to a lot of the positions you're going to be in on the mat, where your back is flat on the floor. You don't have this crazy, crazy, crazy arch, and you're going to need to just produce force from a flat back position. So the floor press does have some good transfer and carryover to jiu-jitsu and other grappling sports in that sense. The other thing I like about floor press is that if you struggle with bench press, especially as you get to the bottom position where you start to experience some form of shoulder pain, some form of elbow pain, or maybe you have a shoulder injury that makes it really, really hard to go heavy on bench press, if that's the case, you can still get a great strength stimulus in a horizontal pressing movement by doing the floor press. Now, I will say this though, if you are avoiding bench press because you do have issues at the bottom position, that's not to say that you should just only do floor press, because there are limitations to doing floor press. You miss out on building strength at the bottom position, which is where you're going to be weakest. So that being said, floor press when it comes to force production ranks very high. When it comes to progression, also ranks very high, because it's just like any other barbell movement. It's very easy to just keep adding load. And it comes to overall feel and practicality, it's pretty easy to set up, just as long as you don't mind laying on the floor and getting dirty a little bit. So I'm going to say the floor press is actually going to go all the way up into S tier. Next exercise, barbell lunge. This is an interesting one because I think in a lot of ways, a barbell lunge on your back has the same limitations and the same downsides to doing a barbell back squat or a barbell front squat. Now, if we're talking about holding the barbell in the crook of our elbows and doing Zercher barbell lunges, that kind of brings up the points for this exercise. So I'll kind of go through all of those and then we'll make a decision at the end. So lunging or kind of stepping forward in that unilateral position is one of the main movements that I look at when trying to develop strength for grappling athletes or coaching athletes to help them get stronger. So when I look at certain strength requirements or helping a grappling athlete get strong, I look at all the main movement patterns that athletes go through: pressing overhead, pushing forwards, pulling backwards, pulling down. The lower body ones are going to be squatting movements, hip hinging or like picking stuff up from the ground, and then lunging movements. Now, not just lunging going forwards and backwards, but also lunging going side to side. The barbell lunge is a great way to load up that lunge movement pattern. However, there are some issues. If you put the bar on your back, I mean, we've all seen those amazing videos of Ronnie Coleman doing those heavy barbell lunges in the parking lot of Metroflex. He's wearing those yellow tights, it's a legendary video and it's amazing. However, if you do have some shoulder issues or some elbow issues, cramming yourself under a heavy bar just to do barbell lunges may not be the best option. Same thing with front rack lunges or having the bar in the front squat position and then trying to do lunges. Now, if we were only talking about those, I'd say those would rank pretty low. I'd probably put those in like C tier because I'm a much bigger fan of doing just heavy dumbbell walking lunges or dumbbell lunges. However, if you do put the bar in the crook of your elbow in the Zercher squat position, that actually kind of solves a lot of those problems. Now, that's not to say that it's going to drastically improve your force production, because if you do hold the bar in the crook of your elbows, you are limited by the strength of your arms, which does, in my opinion, give you a little bit more room to increase the weight that you could use on that exercise compared to like cramming your elbows and shoulders under a straight bar or in a front rack position. When it comes to progression on lunges, I wouldn't say is tough in any way because you can just keep adding load, but it does get a little dicey because you do have to, make sure you have proper balance. If you have a barbell and it tips, regardless of what style of lunge you're doing, whether it's on your back, front rack, or doing Zercher, it does tip a little bit. And sometimes just the instability can limit how much you can progress that movement. Again, that's another reason why I'm a fan of using dumbbells, because the dumbbells just hang at your sides. Now, when it comes to overall feel and practicality, they are pretty easy to set up. You just need a barbell. When it comes to feel, this is a tough one because, in my opinion, front squat walking lunges feel awful. And that's why I don't do them. Back squat style or bar on your back walking lunges, those feel okay. But again, if you have shoulder and elbow issues, that could be a problem. Zercher lunges are probably my favorite. So in the context of this, I'm going to say that this barbell lunge is really a barbell Zercher lunge, and I think it's a great exercise. I'm going to put that up in A tier. We got the box squat, one of my favorite exercises of all time. I'm already thinking that this is going to go up to A or S tier. We will see. So, like I mentioned with the floor press, the box squat separates the downward and upward motion of the squat. And when you do that, you take away the stretch reflex. So you may have seen some people doing those deep astrogast squats where they bounce out of the hole. There's nothing wrong with that. They're just engaging and kind of capitalizing a lot on the stretch reflex. So they hit that bottom position, the muscles are stretched, they kind of slingshot back and help them produce a little bit more force to stand up out of the bottom position. That's awesome. Now, and again, in grappling sports and jiu-jitsu or wrestling, there are so many movements that you don't have the benefit or you don't have the privilege of being able to use the stretch reflex to your advantage. You have to hold a static position and then move right into a dynamic or move into another position. or move into, whatever technique you're trying to hit next. So the box squat can help improve your lower body's ability to produce force from a dead stop position, which I'm a huge fan of. Now, again, in kind of like the barbell lunge issue, there's so many different ways to do box squats. You can do Zercher box squats, which rank very high because they feel a lot better, in my opinion, than doing like a back squat box squat or a front squat box squat. Very practical and easy to set up. Progression, it ranks very high in progression. It doesn't rank as high in force production in a lot of those areas because if you can put a bar on your back, you can box squat a lot more than if you were to hold it in the crook of your elbows. So in my opinion, the box squat and box squat variations already rank high. So I'm already thinking this goes in A tier. However, I'd say if you have a specialty bar, so like a safety squat bar, an SS yoke bar, or a cambered bar, which those bars they kind of change the leverages a little bit on your body. So that way you're able to emphasize either, putting a little bit more load on your upper back or a little bit more load in your hips and in your hamstrings. But the biggest benefit that I like with those specialty bars is that, especially the safety squat bar, where you have the handles right here, you can put that bar on your back. You can get all the benefits of loading a bar on your back where you can handle a lot more weight, but you don't have the downside of cramming your elbows and shoulders under a straight bar. So a safety squat bar, box squat, a cambered bar, box squat, those are automatic S tier exercises for me. Zercher box squats, I'd say, are going to be A tier. And if you do like a regular barbell back squat, assuming that you don't have any prior shoulder or elbow injuries, I'd say that's A tier too. So I guess we'll give it the benefit of the doubt. We'll put box squat in S tier. Next one, barbell overhead press. Okay, so looking at the list here, dumbbell overhead press is going to be an A tier. Now, the issues that I have with the barbell overhead press is that, and I mentioned this with the dumbbell variation, is that a barbell has a little bit more of a fixed position and it has a little less variability for you to move the bar in a position that feels really good on your shoulders, your elbows, and your wrists. So in the criteria of feel and practicality, kind of loses some points on that. Now, when it comes to force production, most people can barbell overhead press, assuming that it's going to be a pain-free barbell overhead press. Most people can barbell overhead press more than they can dumbbell overhead press. So it's already a plus in force production. When it comes to progression, it's pretty easy to progress because you can just add a little bit more load. You can just add a little bit more reps per set. The issue that I think that we run into with the barbell overhead press and progression is that when the weight starts to get really, really heavy and people start straining on the barbell overhead press, they really start to lean back and start arching at the lower back. Now, sometimes that can be intentional to kind of change your leverages a little bit to get a little bit more weight overhead. But a lot of times when people do that, they're not doing it correctly, and it can put a lot of extra stress and strain on the lower back. Does that mean you should avoid barbell overhead press? No, just means that you should be careful with how you're increasing in weight, how you're progressing from week to week, however you're implementing this exercise into your training program. And it's really, really important that you dial in the technical side and the form of doing a proper barbell overhead press, being able to pull your ribs down, properly brace your midsection while you're pressing overhead. Assuming you can do all those things well, barbell overhead press is a fantastic exercise. Now I'm going to put that in A tier. Next exercise we got is the hack squat. This is a hack exercise, I'll tell you that. All jokes aside, hack squats are really, really fun, and I love doing them. Are they the best exercise for grappling strength? If you want to strengthen your quads, yes. So the hack squat, and there's so many different hack squat machines out there, it's kind of hard to say like, well, this machine is great because it allows you to do this. This machine isn't great because you're stuck in this position. But just hack squats in general, most of the time, they emphasize a lot more putting load on the quads versus having a more balanced approach where the load is kind of evenly spaced, or not evenly, but more distributed across your quads, glutes, and hamstrings as opposed to just your quads. So the hack squat is great when it comes to increasing the force production of your quads. It is pretty stable because you kind of are moving on those rails or on that sled, so you can produce a lot of force because you don't have to stabilize as much, and you are isolating the quads, so you don't get all the benefits of strengthening your lower body as opposed to another type of free squatting movement, but your quads can get really strong. I will say the one thing I do like about the hack squat is because it's a little bit more stable, because you can sometimes change the angle at which you're squatting. You can really get down into that deep squat position without the same type of issues that you would have with just having a bar on your back, or even if you had a specialty bar. So hack squats can be beneficial. I do think they lose some points in improving overall strength or overall force production because they really only emphasize the quads. When it comes to progression, really easy to progress that because it's a machine that you can just add a little bit more weight on there or do more reps, and the technicality that's required to do it well is pretty simple. When it comes to overall feel and practicality, it's not very practical if you don't have access to one. And when it comes to the feel, I think that is machine dependent. There were some hack squat machines that I used at other gyms I used to train at that I absolutely hated, and I never touched them. I was like, this feels awful. I don't understand why anyone would want to do this exercise. But then I used another hack squat at a different gym, and it felt amazing, and I used it all the time. So play around with how it feels for you, depending on what kind of hack squat your gym has. But if you train in a garage gym, I don't think you need to get a gym membership just so you can hack squat. So I'm actually going to put hack squats in C tier. The conventional deadlift. Okay, what deadlifts have we talked about so far? We've talked about the trap bar deadlift, talked about the sumo deadlift, and then we got conventional deadlift. Out of all the deadlifts, this is already the worst one, in my opinion. Now, that doesn't mean it's already going to go into F tier with the hand gripper and the clean and jerk, but it's definitely not S tier with the trap bar deadlift and the sumo deadlift. And here's the reason why. The conventional deadlift is great for building posterior chain strength. So the muscles running along the backside of your body, low back, glutes, hamstrings, all that stuff. However, it does place a little bit more load on your lower back compared to exercises like the sumo deadlift or the trap bar deadlift. And it also requires your feet to be close together. Now, we talked about some of the downsides of the trap bar deadlift being that it does only keep your feet close together, and it doesn't necessarily strengthen your hips and some of your inside leg muscles in the same way. But the trap bar deadlift kind of makes up some ground in that area because you can keep the weight on the outside of your body, which allows you to take away a lot of the strain and pressure on your lower back that you would comparatively feel on the conventional deadlift. So conventional deadlift is great. I don't think everyone needs to do conventional deadlifts, but if you avoid conventional deadlifts as a whole, I also think that's a problem. What I'm trying to say is that you don't need to only do heavy conventional deadlifts. There's a lot of benefits that you can get from doing barbell conventional deadlifts, but it doesn't necessarily need to be your A1 exercise for going heavy to build up your posterior chain. So when it comes to force production, if you can do it pain-free and you have the proper skill and technique to be able to do it well, it ranks very high. When it comes to progression, it also ranks very high because it's a barbell movement, pretty easy to just add a little bit more weight. The skill and technique is very important, so that can sometimes limit your progression a little bit. But I think, in my opinion, where the conventional deadlift really suffers is in overall feel, because oftentimes if you're already coming into the gym as a grappling athlete and you're already dealing with some lower back pain or lower back issues, I would not suggest jumping right into conventional deadlifts. So conventional deadlifts, I'm actually going to put in C tier. The Turkish Get Up. Oh, this is automatic F tier. This exercise is horrible for building grappling strength. The Turkish Get Up ranks very low on force production because you're not able to actually produce that much force. Just because you combine all these different movements together doesn't mean you're actually going to improve your ability to get strong or improve your ability to produce force. When it comes to progression, it's actually a pretty crap exercise in progression because you're limited by how much weight you can stabilize over your head with a kettlebell. And when it comes to overall feel and practicality, I think a lot of times the reason why people do Turkish get-ups is because it feels good and it's difficult to do because there's so much instability there. And when you have a lot of instability, that severely limits how much force you can produce. However, is it very practical as it relates to the goal of building grappling strength? No. Just because it looks like a technical stand-up doesn't mean that it's good for jiu-jitsu. And that's one of the most annoying things, in my opinion, is people take movements that we do in jiu-jitsu or in wrestling and try to add weight to them and say, oh, this is great for building grappling strength. And it's not, because you're not really doing anything to improve your overall force production that you can apply on the mat. Turkish Get Up, F tier exercise. If I was ranking these as the worst of the worst so far, Turkish Get Up would actually probably be F tier, worst of the worst. Plate pinch carry. Okay, so we've talked about hand grippers so far, and hand grippers I can already see on my list are an F tier. Plate pinch carry, it's probably the only extra benefit that you get. The only difference in my mind with the plate pinch carry and the hand gripper is that the plate pinch, you also get the added benefit, or the plate pinch carry, you also get the added benefit of working your traps a little bit. But you also have to take points away from that, because if you really wanted to build up your traps, you're definitely not going to pick up a weight like this. You're just going to grip it with a regular crushing grip. So plate pinch carries are really fun to do, and I think it's great for building a more well-rounded grip, in the sense that you don't only want to grab perfectly shaped barbells like this, you also want to change up how you're gripping different objects. So that can be beneficial, especially if someone is having elbow tendonitis or elbow issues that could be related to deficiencies or discrepancies in their overall grip strength and how they're engaging the muscles of their hands and forearms. But when it comes to force production, super, super low, kind of sucks. When it comes to progression, you can progress in the plate pinch carry up to a certain point, but as the plates get thicker and thicker and thicker, at some point you're literally just not going to be able to grip it anymore because your hands aren't big enough. So it kind of sucks in that area. It feels really fun to do, at least mentally and emotionally, it's fun to do. Is it practical? I guess so. So I guess it has some points in there. Plate pinch carry for building overall grappling strength, which is the goal here, is F tier. Next exercise, the back squat. I feel like I've already talked about the back squat without even actually drawing it out of the bowl. So remember, the reason why something like the Zercher Squat ranks pretty high, the reason why I don't think we've talked about any specialty bars yet, or specialty types of squats. The reason why the Zercher Squat in particular ranks pretty high and the front squat actually ranks pretty low is because these movements, the front squat and in this case the back squat, it does put a lot of additional strain on your shoulders and elbows. And if you're just trying to build your lower body, but you're limited and constantly cramming your shoulders and elbows underneath the straight bar and it's causing more issues, I just don't think the juice is worth the squeeze. Because if you're a grappler and if you love to lift heavy and roll hard, that's awesome. That doesn't mean you're a power lifter. So there's really no rules that say that to build up your lower body, you need to put a bar on your back. You can do all sorts of stuff to strengthen your lower body. So back squat, if you can do it pain-free, it could be a great exercise, but that's not the case for every grappler. So am I going to say in this video that this is going to be the best exercise? Absolutely not. Force production, back squat ranks really high. When it comes to progression, back squat is a pretty technically simple movement. Of course, you need to practice it and make sure your form and technique is dialed in on every rep of every set just to get the most out of the exercise. So it does rank pretty high on progression. Feel, it ranks pretty low, I'd say, in my opinion, for a lot of grapplers. Of course, that's not the case for everybody. And practicality, most gyms have squat racks, most gyms have barbells, so it's very high in practicality. So back squat, I would say, well, we got front squat in C tier, we have hack squat in C tier, we have Zercher squat in B tier, and I will put, I'll put it in B tier with the Zercher squat. Toes to bar rotation. This looks really cool because this is in all those kung fu movies, they're always doing calisthenic movements like this, which calisthenics are great. I would say toes to bar rotation. So you lift your legs up and then do that windshield wiper movement. I think that's pretty cool. When it comes to force production, it's kind of low, but kind of like the pull-up force production isn't great, but you are building a ton of strength and moving your own body weight, which has huge benefits for grapplers. So I do think you do get a lot of benefit in that area. The progression of toes to bar rotation, in my mind, it's kind of like you can either do it or you can't. Maybe a progression for toes to bar is if you can't do it all the way, you do your knees up, you pull your knees to your chest first, and then kind of move from side to side. And then as you get stronger, you can extend your legs out and do it that way. But it's not as simple as just adding a little bit more weight or doing a little bit more reps. I mean, I guess if you can do it well for 1 rep, that would be the progression. Just do it well for more reps. But then you do kind of run into some issues there because, theoretically, you can't just keep doing reps until infinity. Nor would that be a good use of your time either. So it kind of loses some points on progression. Feel and practicality. I guess if you can do it, I guess it'd feel pretty good because you're like really getting a lot of great trunk rotation and hitting your abs pretty hard. Practicality, it's if you have a place to do it and just have a pull-up bar, it's actually pretty easy to do, I'd say. So I'm actually kind of surprised. When I first pulled this out, I thought this absolutely sucks, but now I'm thinking it's a little bit better than I thought. So instead of automatically going into F tier, I'm going to say this goes into, I'll put it in B tier, I'd say. Let's see what we have next. The chin-up. Chin-ups are fantastic. We've already talked about pull-ups. Chin-ups are next. Chin-ups, I'm just automatically going to put in S tier because they have all the same benefits of pull-ups with the added benefit of really helping improve your overall elbow and shoulder mobility by really stressing that palm up supinated position. Pull-ups are a little bit easier to do. Chin-ups are a little bit easier to do than pull-ups. So if you can't do 10 bodyweight pull-ups yet as a male grappling athlete, start with chin-ups first. If you can do 10 strict bodyweight chin-ups, then try to work up and do the same with your pull-ups. Chin-ups, in my mind, are any grip where your hands are or your palms are facing your face, or you have a supinated grip because you're holding a bowl of soup. So chin-ups, palms up, pull-ups, neutral grip, or palms forward. Landmine rotation. I'm a huge fan of the landmine. And this exercise is the landmine tool, I'll say, is very versatile for a lot of different reasons. And one of them is that if you check out some of the stuff that Alex Kanellis is doing with Landmine University, the clean and jerk is F tier for a lot of reasons. Landmine clean and jerks, which I don't know if they're in this bowl or not, rank very high because they kind of work around all of the cons of the clean and jerk. And so landmine rotations kind of fall in that same vein as well. If you have a landmine, it's great. It feels amazing, and it's pretty practical to set up if you have a landmine. If you don't, okay, well, that sucks. When it comes to force production, you can do landmine rotations with a lot of weight to increase force production with just moving a ton of load. We're not going to talk about speed and explosive power yet. I might make another video on that, but landmine rotations can also be a great exercise for speed and explosive power. When it comes to progression, you can, it's a kind of like another barbell or machine movement. So you can add just a little bit more load. You can add a little bit more reps to each set. Technically, it's not that difficult, so you're not going to have too much of a learning curve. Landmine rotation is actually pretty solid for building rotational trunk strength. I'm going to put that up in A tier. The hanging leg raise. Okay, so we have toes to bar rotation on there in B tier. Hanging leg raise, I think, is going to rank a little bit higher for all the same benefits. I mean, you're controlling it's a body weight movement, so you're improving the control that you have with your lower body. I think what's great about the hanging leg raise is that you work through a huge range of motion and being able to not just pull your knees to your chest, but pull like your kneecaps to your face almost, and strengthening your lower abs and your hips. And that type of movement is going to be really important for guard retention, really important for any position where you're kind of closing and pulling your knees to your elbows. So I think that's a huge benefit. It's similar in the sense of with pull-ups and chin-ups that you're not producing a ton of force, but you also are getting a lot of benefit in being able to move your own body weight. When it comes to progression, if you can't do a strict hanging leg raise, there's a lot of ways you can scale that exercise down. You can start with just doing hanging knee raises, then doing hanging straight leg raises just up to like your hip level, and then moving up to your chest level, and then trying to reach and kind of get your toes to touch the bar overhead. So it's a fairly easy progression. And then when it comes to overall feel and practicality, it's very practical as long as you have access to a pull-up bar. And feel, it feels pretty good. And I'd also say that the hanging leg raise does kind of highlight some mobility restrictions, especially in the lower body. If you have really, really tight hamstrings and you lock your legs out and you're trying to do that hanging leg raise movement and you feel some of that stiffness and tightness, or you start to feel like your lower back is rounding and you're almost like curling yourself up in a ball just to get your legs up, that may be a sign that you could benefit from doing a little bit more mobility work on your hamstrings. That's not to say that the hanging leg raise is like the ultimate mobility assessment, but that's just something I've seen as a coach. If an athlete really struggles in the hanging leg raise, then we work a little bit on their hamstring mobility over the next couple of weeks. I find that they're a little bit better prepared and can get into some of those hanging leg raise positions a little bit easier. So hanging leg raise, fantastic. We put toes to bar rotation in B tier, and I think this is a better exercise than that. So I'm going to put that in A tier. Hanging leg raise officially in A tier. Next, next exercise, the Paloff Press, automatic F tier. Here's the reason why. When it comes to force production, you're not producing a ton of force. Like you are getting a little bit of anti-rotation in there as you press the band out and away from you. It can be great for strengthening some of the muscles of your trunk, especially if you're dealing with some lower back issues and you need to improve your ability to resist rotation. But I wouldn't say it's great for like building maximal strength. It's pretty awful compared to some of the other exercises we have in here. However, it can be an exercise that can be appropriately mixed into a back to practice or back to play protocol. So if you're coming off of a pretty serious injury, especially like some sort of lower back injury, and you want to gradually build up the strength to get back into grappling sports where you are going to go through a lot of intense rotation and a lot of intense anti-rotation, the Paloff Press can be one of the exercises you use on that path, but it's not something that you're going to stick with because the next progression of the Paloff Press is just adding more of a heavier band, and that doesn't always serve you very well. I would actually say, do the Paloff Press for a while if you're coming off of an injury, or that would be my suggestion, and then move into exercises that require a lot more rotation and anti-rotation, something like the Landmine Rotation. So Paloff Press, when it comes to building top end grappling strength, pretty low. The progression also kind of sucks. Does it feel good? I guess so. And is it practical to do? I guess so, but that's not good enough for me. So Paloff Press, you go in F tier. The lat pull down. Lat pull downs are great if you do them correctly. I see a lot of people doing just absolutely atrocious lat pull downs, and there's nothing wrong with doing a real jerky lat pull down, but the downside is that you just don't get as much benefit out of the exercise. It can be great for building upper back strength and vertical pulling strength. I think at a certain extent, where pull-ups start to lose some of their progression, you can either add load to pull-ups, which if you're doing pull-ups and you work up to being able to do 20 strict bodyweight pull-ups with proper form and technique, I'd say you're at a good spot to add additional weight. You don't have to, but you can add some additional weight. If you can't do 20 strict pull-ups, I don't think you should be adding weight to those calisthenic movements, or at least the pull-up. Now, if you struggle with pull-ups, the lat pull down is kind of like the intermediary exercise that I would put in pull-up progression. So if you really struggle and you can't do 10 pull-ups, maybe do some sets of 2 or 3 pull-ups and then crank out some heavy lat pull downs. If you are, way past doing 20 pull-ups, you can do 25, 30 pull-ups in a row. You can add a little bit of load to those, or you can start going a little bit heavier on your lat pull downs to get a little extra extra emphasis on that vertical pulling strength. So lat pull downs can be great in force production. Progression's pretty easy because you can either just add more reps, you can either add more weight, and the technicality that's required for the lat pull down is essentially zero because it's super easy to do. And then feel and practicality, if you have access to a lat pull down, it's great, and most of the time it feels great. So is it the greatest vertical pulling strength exercise on the planet? No, but I do think it's pretty awesome, so I'm going to put it in A tier. Next up, we have the hack squat. We already talked about the hack squat. Well, that hack squat is already in C tier, so we're just going to wad this up and toss it over there because that's a repeat. That's my bad. Sorry, guys. Okay, this is another one of my favorite, dips. Dips are a fantastic grappling strength exercise, very similar to the same reasons we talked about with the other calisthenic movements, which are the chin up, the pull up, the hanging leg raise. Those are all A and S tier. I'd say dips are also going to go in S tier because the pull up is one of the best body weight exercises to develop vertical pulling strength. The dip is going to be one of the best body weight exercises to develop horizontal pressing strength. Now, one thing that I really love about dips is that not only do you get really strong triceps and extensor muscles, but you can really work on improving the mobility of your shoulder by sinking into that bottom position and building strength in that bottom position. If you guys remember when I was talking about the incline dumbbell curl or the incline bicep curl, even though you're not going to be lifting like 100-pound dumbbells on the incline bicep curl, you do build a lot of strength in that extended position. The dip, I think, has very similar benefits where if you are working through a full range of motion, you build a lot of strength in the shoulders and in the elbows in those bottom positions where you're most likely going to be weakest. And I think that has a lot of benefit and carryover to helping you decrease your risk of injury on the mat. So dips, you are going in S tier, my friend. The leg press. The leg press, I'm already thinking is just going to go in the C tier with hack squat because leg press force production, yeah, it ranks very high in force production because it's a very, very stable movement. We see people all the time like hogging all the plates in the gym, just freaking gangstering out on leg press. Progression, yeah, it's super simple to do. It's really easy to just add a little bit more weight or do more reps. When it comes to overall feel, I guess it feels good, and I guess it's practical if you have access to a leg press machine. The downsides with the leg press are that you are almost a little bit too locked in. And I guess I could have said this with the hack squat too. When we think about building grappling strength, or at least the way I think about building grappling strength, I've spent over a decade training on the mat, and I've spent over a decade training in the gym. In the last 7 years, I've specifically been coaching only grappling athletes. And so in that context, I really think about, okay, what are the main athletic movements that the human body goes through, and how can we get stronger in those? Because those building general strength in those movements is going to have a great transfer and carryover to all the movements that they do on the mat. One of those is going to be squatting. So I think a squatting movement where you start standing, you go down, your hips go below parallel or as low as what's necessary, and then you stand up out of that position. That to me is an essential movement that I want to see athletes get stronger in because I believe that has a great transfer and carryover to the strength and the force that they can produce on the mat. The leg press kind of takes that away a little bit because you lock your upper back in, you lock your hips into the bottom in that seat, or whether it's on the floor or whether you have one of those like pin loaded leg press machines where you're kind of on that sliding chair, and all you're doing is you're just pushing and extending with your legs. And in my opinion, I think just because someone is really, really strong in the leg press, I still have yet to see that person can have a great transfer and carryover to them being ridiculously strong on the mat. Oftentimes when people are using the leg press and they can load up all those plates, they're really good at creating the most amount of leverage possible to move all that weight. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're physically getting that much stronger. Yeah, they're getting stronger a little bit, but only in the context of using those leverages for that machine. So all that being said, when I think of this exercise, it's kind of a tricky one, but if I had to roll with two people and one guy said, oh, I leg press 1,000 pounds, and another guy says, I squat 500 pounds. Yeah, that guy's using 50% of the weight that the other guy was using. The guy that squats 500, in my opinion, I can almost guarantee is going to be a stronger grappler, feel stronger, be able to apply more force in all of his technique and all of his movements compared to the guy that just leg presses all the time. So leg press, I'm going to put you in C tier with hack squat. Incline dumbbell bench press. Okay, I don't know if you guys listen to the Modern Wisdom podcast with Chris Williamson. Great podcast, by the way. Anytime he has a fitness expert on there, he usually always asks them, like, what are your top 10 exercises for muscle growth? I think almost every single guest that's been on there has said incline dumbbell bench press. Main reason being is because you have dumbbells, so you're not going to stop at the bottom position on your chest with like you would with a barbell. You can actually move the dumbbells out to the side, get a much bigger stretch at the bottom position, which kind of like the dip also means that you can build strength in the shoulders at that fully extended bottom position. That's one of the biggest benefits of the incline dumbbell bench press. And then the other thing too is that because you are at a little bit of an incline, you, depending on how much of an incline you use, you do get to work a little bit more of your front delt and your upper chest. So I think the incline dumbbell bench is fantastic. And I mean, Chris in the Modern Wisdom podcast, I think every time was asking this question in the context of building muscle or muscle hypertrophy, which that's not a bad thing, especially for grapplers. But even in the context of building grappling strength, I think doing incline dumbbell bench press is fantastic. So in S tier, we have the floor press, which covers horizontal pressing strength. If you want to do a little bit of a hybrid, a little vertical and horizontal hybrid, then yeah, let's put incline dumbbell bench press in S tier. I think that's fair. We have the one arm dumbbell row. Okay, so the other rowing exercise that we have on this list is the bent over row, which is in B tier. Now, the issues that I had with the bent over row were that you do put a little bit more stress and load on your lower back. The other downside to the bent over row that I forgot to mention is that because you have a bar, that means the bar stops at your sternum or at your midsection. So you can't actually get your elbows as far back as you normally could because the bar is going to stop you. And anytime we can work through a greater range of motion and build strength through a greater range of motion, I'm a big fan of. Now, the one arm dumbbell row, when it comes to force production, is awesome because one hand can help stabilize your body. So you can put all that force and really load up your lats and get a little bit of your traps and your rear delts in there and really go heavy on the one arm dumbbell row. And because you're using a dumbbell and not a barbell, you can work through a full range of motion, which is going to be fantastic. And that being said, I think one arm dumbbell row deserves to be in S tier. I don't know if I'm doing this tier video correctly because we're kind of filling up the S tier section. But maybe that's because all of these exercises, which you guys are the ones that submitted all of these, you guys are just really good at picking great exercises for building grappling strength. Okay, next up we have the power clean. Power clean, unfortunately, is going to go into F tier. Now, pretty much for all the same reasons that the clean and jerk is in F tier. If you're using a barbell, I mean, the power clean is great for increasing overall power, given the name power clean, but you are cramming your wrist, elbows, and shoulders under a straight bar. To do a power clean correctly, it does have a pretty high learning curve, so progression that kind of gets in the way of progression at some points. And then when it comes to force production, power cleaning means that, when it comes to another aspect of progression, power clean, for it to be a true power clean, means you have to clean the weight and land with your hips above parallel. So progression, you can just keep adding weight up until the point where you have to dip below parallel to catch the bar and then stand all the way up. So I guess that doesn't really mess with progression too much. Force production is really high on the power clean, but the biggest issues I see in this are in overall feel and practicality. It doesn't always feel great for grappling athletes, and it does have a pretty high learning curve. So power clean, unfortunately, you're going into F tier. I will say on the topic of Olympic lifts, clean and jerk, power clean. I think there's someone submitted the snatch, barbell snatch in here. Those are great if you can do them pain-free. And if that's you and you're one of the rare grapplers that doesn't have any shoulder, elbow, or wrist injuries that can do a full clean and jerk, a full power clean, a full snatch pain-free, then that's awesome. And I think you could definitely benefit from those. However, if you're not in that group, there are some Olympic lifting variations that can be beneficial. So a hang snatch or a clean pull just from the floor, or doing like a snatch high pull or something like that. These Olympic lifting variations, I think those have way more benefit for grappling athletes than the full clean and jerk, than the full snatch, than the full power clean. And I don't know if anybody put Olympic lifting variations in here, so probably not going to be on this list. That being said, I also think that I mentioned him before when we talked about the Landmine Rotation. Alex Kanellis at Landmine University, those versions of the clean and jerk, the landmine clean and jerk, the landmine snatch, those are way easier to learn how to do, so a lot lower learning curve, so it makes progression a lot easier. You can produce a ton of force and even get a little bit of spinal rotation in those movements as well. And I found that they feel amazing because they don't put the same sort of stress on your wrist, elbows, and shoulders like the regular clean and jerk or snatch does. The lateral raise. When it comes to strength, F tier, automatically. One, force production. How much force can you produce on a dumbbell lateral raise? Not a lot. Progression, I could see the lateral raise makes some points up in progression because you can just keep adding a little bit of weight, but you really just add a little bit of weight until you start heaving the weight up like this, and you're really only building strength in the muscles of your shoulder and that one specific movement. So progression is still kind of low. Feel, I think lateral raises feel great. Practical, yeah, if you have access to dumbbells, they're pretty practical, but force production is so freaking low that it goes to F tier. Kettlebell swing. Okay, this is an interesting one because the kettlebell swing is more of a explosive power exercise than a strength exercise. Does the kettlebell swing help improve your ability to produce force? Yes, but it leans more, instead of focusing more on top end force production and building maximal strength, it really leans more on the side of improving maximum explosive power. So the kettlebell swing, if this was a list on exercises to build speed and explosive power, kettlebell swing would be automatic S tier for me. However, it's not necessarily the greatest exercise for building strength in the same way that you can build strength and grind through on heavy deadlifts, heavy squats, things like that. But I honestly feel bad for putting it in F tier because I don't think the kettlebell swing is definitely not on the same level as the Turkish Get Up, which is just, in my mind, just a silly exercise. So kettlebell swing, you are going to increase some of your grip strength a little bit, explosive power in the hips and the posterior chain, but it's not the best exercise for top end strength. So it kind of pains me to say that the kettlebell swing is going to go into C tier, but don't run out on me, kettlebell swing, because when I make the video on explosive power, you're going to take the title in S tier. Overhead tricep extension. This is also automatic F tier because it's kind of similar to the lateral raise. When you isolate certain muscle groups, it's really hard for those exercises to go into S tier because you're isolated in a muscle group, and so the force production is already going to be super, super low. For an isolation exercise to make it into S tier or even into some of the A or B tiers, it has to be something like the incline bicep curl, where you get so much benefit from building strength at those end ranges that it has a great transfer and carryover to you being better prepared to be a strong grappler. And I don't necessarily see the overhead tricep extension having an equal amount of benefit compared to the incline bicep curl. However, it's definitely not F tier. I might have said at the very start of this, it's like, oh, automatic F tier. But now that I'm thinking about it, it might be a little bit better because you are getting into that overhead position. You're getting that big stretch on the tricep as it goes behind your body. So what started as F tier, I'm actually going to put overhead tricep extension in C tier because if you have access to a cable machine or dumbbells, it is very practical and it feels pretty good. really easy to progress. It just really loses a lot of points on overall force production or improving your ability to produce force. Dumbbell RDL. So I didn't even realize that this was even on the list. So Romanian deadlifts are fantastic because they really emphasize your posterior chain, and they also give you a great loaded stretch on the hamstrings. The difference between a deadlift and an RDL is that with an RDL, you really are doing a full loaded stretch on the hamstring, and you don't really ever take tension off the hamstrings. So a regular deadlift, you are just trying to stand the weight up. So you're getting a little bit of your quads involved, you're getting a lot of your hamstrings, a lot of your glutes, some of your lower back. The RDL kind of takes the quads out of the movement and really emphasizes just using the hamstrings and the glutes. And maybe, depending on how you're doing it, a little bit of your lower back. So as far as being a posterior chain builder, this exercise is fantastic. The dumbbell RDL, but I don't know if barbell RDLs are in here, but dumbbell RDLs, the only problem I see with that is sometimes you keep working up in weight with dumbbells. They're just a pain in the butt to try to control, especially for such a heavy lower body movement, that you do kind of run into some issues with progression. And it's just way more practical to use a barbell. So I guess practically, if you're really maxing out on dumbbell RDLs, which I don't know why you would, it kind of loses some points there. Force production is good in my mind. Progression is good if you're using it in the right context. And then I think they feel awesome. And in practicality, they're practical until you get too strong or get strong enough to where you really should just be doing it with barbells. So I'll put dumbbell RDL in, I was going to put it in A tier, and now I'm second guessing. Let's do it. Okay, we put conventional deadlift in C tier, and I think dumbbell RDLs are better than conventional deadlift, because you're not using so much weight that you're going to have the same issues with your lower back as you would with conventional deadlift. So that definitely bumps it up a spot. And we put bent over row in B tier because of the lower back issues at times. But then we also put, all right, I'll just put it in B tier. Dumbbell RDL, you're going in B tier. The snatch. This is automatic F tier for all the reasons we've talked about before with the power clean and the clean and jerk. Now, again, there may be some snatch variations that could be beneficial for grapplers, like the power snatch if you have good overhead mobility and shoulder stability, or the snatch pull, or the snatch high hang, or snatch high pull. Yeah, I think I said that right, the snatch high pull. Those can be great for grapplers, and I would prefer grapplers lean more on those variations. But again, it's a power-based exercise. The clean and jerk, power-based exercise. Snatch, power-based exercise. Clean and jerk, or power clean, power-based exercise. Same with the kettlebell swing. So I think if this was a list more about speed and explosive power, the snatch might rank a little bit higher with some of the other Olympic lifts, but we're talking about maximal strength. And I just don't see the snatch moving any higher than F tier. So sorry, my Olympic weightlifting bros. All right, only a few more exercises to go. The Nordic Curl. All right, I'm a huge fan of the Nordic Curl because this really is like a pull-up for your lower body. It really emphasizes building strength in the hamstrings. And I will say this about the Nordic Curl. Right before I tore my LCL, I hit a PR on doing 10 Nordic 10? I did 10 to 12 full range of motion unassisted Nordic curls, and I felt freaking awesome. And my hamstrings were crazy strong, and I think just building up all the strength in my hamstrings and some of the tissues behind my knee really helped. I mean, I still tore my LCL. There's going to be no avoiding that, but I think the extent of the damage that I did to my LCL was kind of lowered a little bit because I'd built up so much strength and a lot of the tissues on the backside of my legs, especially with the Nordic curl. So again, I can't say that the Nordic curls are going to prevent injury, but I believe in my own experience that the Nordic curl really helped me not suffer as serious of an injury as maybe I would have if I had really weak hamstrings. All that being said, Nordic Curl is, again, a pull-up for the lower body, so you get all the benefits of being able to strengthen the hamstrings by being able to control your own body weight, as opposed to just doing a movement like a machine leg curl, where you're just pulling your heel to your butt and you're not pulling your body up with your hamstrings. So we put dips, we put chin-ups, we put pull-ups all in S tier. I'm going to put Nordic Curls in S tier too. So there you go, Nordic Curl, yet in S tier. Next up, we have, I actually did this morning during my workout with my boys. So chest supported row. This is already S tier in my mind, and here's the reason why. As I'm looking at the list, we put bent over row in B tier. Two things that moved bent over row down some spots is that it doesn't work through a full range of motion because the bar stops on your chest, and you put a lot of additional strain and load on your lower back. Not always is going to be a bad thing, but can be an issue for some grapplers. So I'll say that if bent over row is in B tier, chest supported row automatically moves up into A tier. When it comes to the other exercises in A tier, like the dumbbell overhead press, barbell lunge, barbell overhead press, lat pull down, landmine rotation, and the hanging leg raise, I like all of those, but I really feel like chest supported row, like you can get a brutally strong back and really increase your pulling strength, which is one of those main movements I was talking about with the chest supported row. So I'm just going to put this in S tier because I think it's fantastic, and I did it this morning, and I feel great. Next one, we have the Pendlay Row. Okay, so the Pendlay Row is a little bit different than the barbell row. The Pendlay Row, you could almost think of like as a box squat for the bent over row, because the Pendlay Row looks very similar, except every rep starts and stops on the floor. The bent over row, the bar never has to touch the floor once you get the set started. The Pendlay Row is very specific in the sense that the bar starts on the floor. From a dead stop position, you pull up, row the bar into your chest, and then you set it back down. Row it up into your chest, then set it back down. Now, it does have the same downsides to the bent over row, being that it doesn't work through a full range of motion, and if you have any sort of lower back issues, it can put a little extra strain on your lower back. But that added benefit of building explosive pulling strength from a dead stop position, or doesn't just have to be explosive pulling strength, but just building your ability to produce force from a dead stop position with the Pendlay Row, I think already moves it up above the regular bent over row. So Pendlay Row, you are going in A tier. Rope climb. Rope climbs, man, rope climbs are fun. Who doesn't love doing rope climbs? When I was wrestling and doing CrossFit, we would do rope climbs all the time. And rope climbs, it's a great exercise for building your vertical pulling strength and grip strength, because a lot of times those ropes are pretty thick. And I think you also get a lot of additional benefit from changing kind of how you're doing these vertical pulling exercises. If you always do bilateral pulling exercises, and it's always you're kind of moving your body as kind of one locked in, like a plank, almost like you're doing a plank with your body as you do a chin up or as you do a pull up. I think it's great to build strength that way. I also think it's great to build strength in all these different positions where you kind of have to change the position of your body to reach up and pull yourself up, or I guess like kind of pull the rope down as you're pulling yourself up, and then same thing. So rope climbs I think are great. I'll put those up in S tier with pull-ups and chin-ups. The Cossack Squat. The Cossack Squat is one of my favorite exercises of all time, especially for jiu-jitsu athletes, and especially for jiu-jitsu athletes who like to do a lot of guard play. So the Cossack Squat is a lateral movement. So you're kind of squatting all the way over to one side. And when you do that, you are strengthening the quads, the glutes, the hips of the leg that on the side that you're squatting over to, but you're also improving the mobility and the flexibility a bit of the extended leg. You get to work a little bit of your adductors, you get a little bit of hamstring load in there too. So the Cossack Squat is great. It's also a great indicator, or a great mobility test, which is an indicator to me like, hey, if someone can't do a Cossack Squat and I can watch them do it, I can see where they're having some mobility restrictions. I can see maybe where they're having some specific muscular weaknesses that we may need to improve upon. Cossack Squat is great When it comes to force production, you're obviously not going to be able to produce as much force on the Cossack squat as you would with a regular bilateral squat, or even with something like a lunge movement, like a dumbbell walking lunge. But you do get the added mobility benefits and building strength in those extended positions, which I've talked about a lot this video. I'll say that the Cossack squat, when it comes to progression, is pretty tough. It does lose some points because you can do bodyweight Cossack squats, then you can do goblet Cossack squats, but then your goblet Cossack squat becomes limited by how much weight you can hold up by your chest. I think the last time I did heavy Cossack squats, I was using a 70-pound kettlebell, and that felt awful. I mean, it felt horrible. Not because I was burning out on my lower body, just because my upper body, it was so hard to hold that kettlebell and maintain balance. So as much fun as Cossack squats are, I'm gonna put Cossack squats in B tier because they do lose some points once you really start trying to go heavy on Cossack squats. Next up, farmer carry. Farmer carry is, I'm already thinking it's going to go into A tier. It's great for building up the isometric strength in your upper back, your grip, your traps, all that good stuff. Yeah, you're not going to produce as much force as you would on something like a regular deadlift, because a deadlift, you're just picking it up. A farmer carry, you have to pick it up and start walking with it. But I think there's bear hug carry in here somewhere. Maybe we haven't gotten to it yet, but I'd say farmer carry has a lot of the same benefits as a bear hug carry. Yeah, you're not producing force in a concentric movement like you're standing up with a deadlift or standing up out of a squat or pushing a weight in front of you, but you're building a lot of isometric strength just to be able to maintain solid position in your upper body while you're walking with your lower body. So farmer carry, I'm going to put in A tier. Next up, the Z press. Okay, the Z press is an overhead press. If you don't know what it is, it's an overhead press where you're sitting on your butt and your legs are extended out in front of you. Now, when it comes to force production, most people can overhead press more than they can Z press. But I said that the barbell overhead press is not an S tier because a lot of times as you get heavier and heavier, if you start arching to do a lot of your overhead presses, you can put a little extra strain on your lower back, which can be pretty uncomfortable. That can mess with progression. That can also take away points from the criteria of feel and practicality. The Z press, because you're sitting on your butt, there's no way you can arch your lower back, because if you start to arch your lower back and lean back, you just tip over. And so if you're doing it in a power rack with safety pins, it's a very safe exercise, helps protect your lower back, at least in my opinion it does. I would say with the Z press, the downside is not just in overall force production, but when it comes to progression, if someone can't get into a Z press position, it's really, really hard to do. So if you don't have the abdominal strength and the trunk strength to maintain that strong upright position, you got tightness in your hamstrings where it makes it really hard for you to pull your torso forward to be perfectly upright. That could be a problem. So Z press does lose some points there. Feel and practicality. If you have the mobility to do it, it feels great. Practicality, it's hard to set up if you don't have a power rack with pins, because then you have to do kind of like a clean from the floor, and then you're limited by how much you can do this little clean from the floor into the starting position. So I love the Z press, personal favorite of mine, but let's be honest, it probably has to go in C tier, which pains me to say because I freaking love that exercise. Next up, bear hug carry. I knew that was in here somewhere. So bear hug carry has a lot of benefits in the same reason that that farmer carries, I guess you could do with the trap bar, that farmer carries have benefits. You're not developing a lot of concentric strength with the bear hug carry, but you are developing a lot of isometric strength, especially in your grip and your upper back and postural muscles. Now, if you hold it, the bear hug, or like if you're a sandbag or a med ball, if you hold it up here, it really strengthens your upper back. If you hold it down here, it's kind of pressing on your diaphragm. That's really uncomfortable, and it can be hard to brace when you're holding it down here. So I think there's some added benefit to making the exercise a little bit more difficult in that context. So force production, I'd say it's pretty good because you're building a lot of isometric strength. You have to pick it up off the floor to even get started. So I think that's also a good thing. Progression. Progression is going to be interesting because when it comes to strength, you could just keep adding load, but then if you're going to carry it for longer, you really start to then get into like local muscular endurance, or I've heard some people even call it like strength endurance. Like, if you could only pick up this super, super heavy sandbag and carry it for 10 seconds, then you move into 20 seconds. You keep running that logic. Okay, now you're just going to walk with it for a minute. You probably need to find a heavier sandbag or a heavier med ball. And sometimes it's hard to constantly be moving up in weight with something like a bear hug carry. So the farmer walk is easy to progress because you can just add heavier dumbbells, or if you have farmer handles, you could just add a little bit more weight. Bear hug carry makes that a little bit tougher, even though it's a great exercise. Feel and practicality. It feels great. Practicality, if you don't have a big med ball or you don't have a big sandbag, that makes it kind of tough. So we put farmer carry in A tier. I'm going to put bear hug carry in B tier. Okay, 4 more exercises to go. What do we got? Dumbbell bench press. Okay, we put incline dumbbell bench press in S tier, and I'm tempted to just put dumbbell bench press in S tier also, because again, you're working through a full range of motion to develop horizontal pressing strength. When it comes to force production, you can go really heavy on dumbbell bench press, which is awesome. You are a little bit unstable, so you can obviously bench press more with a barbell than you could with dumbbells, but I think it's okay in this context because you are going to be working through a much greater range of motion. So those pros and cons kind of cancel each other out. When it comes to progression, the dumbbell bench press is fairly easy from a technical standpoint. So you can really make huge progressions just by constantly getting stronger, adding more load, or adding more reps. When it comes to feel and practicality, for some grapplers, doing heavy dumbbell bench press doesn't feel great, especially if they have some AC joint issues or they have any other shoulder issue or pec issue, where going heavy and getting that big stretch at the bottom position could be problematic for some people, but I think that's less often than not. And then practicality, almost every gym has a set of dumbbells. So dumbbell bench press, you are going in S tier. Oh, I can't believe we're just now getting to this exercise. This exercise, automatic S tier, Bulgarian split squat. So this is an exercise. It's a unilateral exercise. So you're working one leg at a time. What's great about this one is that you do get to load up the front leg a lot. You can change it up to how you want to strengthen the quads by driving your knee over your toe. You can strengthen your hamstrings by keeping your knee directly over your ankle. You can produce a ton of force in that movement and really strengthen your ability or improve your ability to produce force on that one leg, which is great. And you also get a loaded stretch on the back leg, or on the back hip, and a bit of the quad, which I think is awesome. So Bulgarian split squats, huge points in force production, progression, fairly easy to do. You can just keep adding load with dumbbells. I have seen people do Bulgarian split squats with a bar on their back, and I did do a phase of training where I tried that, and I mean, it felt okay, but you do start to run into the issue of like tipping side to side, and that kind of takes away from some of the movement, I think. So I really just like grabbing 1 or 2 super heavy dumbbells and doing Bulgarian split squats that way. When it comes to feel, there's a lot of people out there that hate Bulgarian split squats because it's uncomfortable and it burns, and I think, like, get over it. The exercise is amazing in my mind. And practicality, most places have dumbbells and most places have benches. So Bulgarian split squat, you, my friend, are going into S tier. Next up, bench press. Bench press, I feel like I've talked about bench press a ton already, and we haven't even gotten to it yet. So when it comes to force production, bench press, fantastic. Progression, fantastic, because it's pretty simple to do once you get the hang of it. Of course, you can always like improve your form and technique a little bit more, but it's not going to have the same level of complexity and difficulty like a clean and jerk would. Overall feel and practicality, that is where I think a lot of times bench press moves down on the list, because it may not feel great to bring the bar all the way down to your chest, especially if you have any sort of grappling shoulder or elbow issues where getting down in that deep bottom position is where those issues tend to flare up. If that is the case, that means that you should work on improving those aspects of your strength and athleticism so that way you don't have those issues and you can do bench press. But that is just worth noting. So for bench press, I would say, we put the floor press in S tier and we put dumbbell bench press in S tier. If you were only to do the exercises on the S tier list, you got floor press and dumbbell bench press, I don't really see a need for regular barbell bench press anymore. So I guess if that's the case, then I'll just put bench press in A tier. Final exercise, and this is a good one, the glute ham raise. So what's the difference between the glute ham raise and the Nordic curl? When I first put this out on Instagram and YouTube for you guys to send in what exercises you think are best for building grappling strength, a lot of you guys said Nordic curls, and some of you guys also said glute ham raises. The biggest difference with the glute ham raise and the Nordic curl is that the Nordic curl, you don't engage any muscles of your feet or your calves because there isn't a back plate for you to press into against. And when you actually engage your feet and your calves, it actually helps you engage a little bit more of your hamstrings. And so a lot of people find that glute ham raises are much easier than Nordic curls. The other thing too is if you're using a glute ham machine or like a glute ham, I guess it's a machine, even though it doesn't really do much. You kind of like wedge yourself in there. When you're using a glute ham raise setup, I'd say, you also change the angles of where your feet and your knee is in proportion to how your body weight is falling. So that can also make it a little bit easier. It doesn't mean that it's a bad exercise, just means that Nordic curls are going to be a lot tougher. So in the same way that pull-ups are going to be a little bit harder than chin-ups, but I think they're both S-tier exercises, glute ham raises are going to be a little bit easier than Nordic curls, and I would say that those are both S-tier exercises. And that's it. Those are all the exercises that you guys submitted. If you guys have questions about any of the exercises that we talked about in this video, feel free to drop them in the comments below, and I'll catch you guys later. Lift heavy, roll hard. Peace.